Thomas was sitting in the luxurious armchair of his New York apartment, looking out at the city at night, shining with lights. It seemed that his life was perfect. A successful business, financial stability, an apartment overlooking Manhattan, a wife. But somewhere deep inside, he felt an emptiness that he had been trying to fill for years with work, new projects, and expensive acquisitions. But it was all in vain. It seemed to him that he was stuck in the trap of his own life, with no way out. Tonight, he decided to attend one of the fashion parties to which his friends invited him. At first, he didn't want to go. These events always seemed empty and artificial to him. But at the last moment, he changed his mind. Perhaps, he thought, fresh air and new faces would lighten the burden of routine thoughts. The party was on a high floor of one of the glass towers in the very center of the city. The guests were greeted by luxurious chandeliers, crystal champagne glasses, and light jazz accompaniment that barely touched the mind, creating an atmosphere of luxury and mystery. Among the crowd of young faces, Thomas noticed a girl. She stood out among the others because of her natural grace and attractiveness. Her name was Eliza, and at first glance he could tell that she was much younger than he was. Her blonde curls fell gently over her shoulders, and her eyes, sparkling and inquisitive, gave her face a mysterious look. Thomas approached her, their eyes met, and for a moment it seemed that the whole world had disappeared. Eliza smiled at him with that light, easy smile that touched him so much. They began to talk. Thomas, at first trying to keep his distance, suddenly felt himself being pulled into a whirlpool by her conversation. Her voice, her laugh, everything seemed new and unusual to him, as if it was what he had been missing. During the evening, their conversations became more and more open. They discussed life, desires, dreams, and fears. Thomas felt himself being filled with an overwhelming desire to be with her, to know her more. He couldn't understand what was drawing him to her so strongly, but every minute he felt more and more that he needed her presence. Time seemed to stand still. Thomas completely forgot about his family, his status, his responsibilities. At that moment he saw only Eliza, her grace, lightness, and charm. She seemed to him an unattainable dream that he had been chasing for so long, but which always slipped through his fingers. And at the same time, he could feel a certain distrust in her eyes, a hint of danger that was so hard to ignore. Later, when the party was coming to an end, Thomas suggested that Eliza take a walk. They went out on the terrace and the wind freshened their faces, bringing with it the smell of the night city. He stood next to her, and this closeness seemed almost forbidden to him, but so sweet. "You seem like a mystery to me," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. Eliza only smiled and looked away, but there was something mysterious in that smile, something that Thomas could not fully unravel. It seemed fragile and dangerous at the same time, like a flame that he reached for, even though he knew he might get burned. "Do you like to solve riddles?" she asked, as if reading his mind. Thomas didn't answer, just kept looking at her. It was the beginning of something irreversible, something that would change his life forever. But at that moment, all he could think about was that he needed her. Los Angeles greeted Thomas with a soft morning sun as he returned to his daily life. His home was located in a quiet suburb, where white houses with manicured lawns stood in a row, hiding behind their walls the stories of families in which everyone played a role. Thomas played the role of a successful man and a model husband, but he had long since realized that this was just a mask he put on every morning when he left the house. His wife, Anna, would rush to the office in the morning. She was a talented lawyer, completely dedicated to her career. Their marriage, once full of passion, had now become a comfortable arrangement. They got used to this distance, as if they were living parallel lives, only occasionally crossing paths in short conversations at breakfast or during joint events. Anna hadn't noticed Thomas's aloofness for a long time, perhaps because she was just as absorbed in her work, immersed in client cases and endless litigation. That morning, while Anna was hastily collecting documents in a folder, Thomas thought for a moment, perhaps he still loved her? But then the memory of Eliza, their nighttime walk, and the mysterious smile she gave him melted away any doubts. He felt alive next to her, and this surpassed all rational doubts. Anna quickly said goodbye without even looking at him. The exit door closed. leaving silence hanging in the spacious house. Thomas knew that he would soon see Eliza again, but at the same time he was plagued by a strange feeling of anxiety. Her youth and beauty attracted him, but there was something destructive about this attraction, something that made him feel as if he were on the edge of a cliff. Later that day, he went to meet his friend Robert. Robert was one of the few people Thomas trusted. They had known each other since university and had always kept in touch. Charismatic, a bit cynical, but always frank, Robert was someone Thomas could talk to without any filters. "You look better than usual," Robert remarked when they met at a cafe. Thomas smiled, and his eyes shone with a sparkle that hadn't been there for a long time. "Maybe," he answered evasively. "I met a girl. She's different. Fresh, alive, full of energy. It doesn't seem like anything serious, just a meeting." Robert nodded, smiling slightly. "And how long do you think you'll keep this just meeting thing going? Thomas, you're playing with fire, and you know it." "But I need this, Robert. I feel like I've finally woken up. Sometimes that feeling is stronger than any reasonable argument." Thomas sighed, hiding the uncertainty his friend's words had caused. Robert looked at him carefully. "Listen, I'm not judging you. Just be careful. If your Anna ever finds out what you're doing, it won't end well. And also, be careful with the girl. You know that young people today are not always as innocent as they seem." These words stuck in Thomas's mind like a bitter sludge, but he pushed his doubts aside, caught up in the thought of his next meeting with Eliza. He didn't want to think about the risks or consequences. He didn't care how dangerous his actions could be. He just wanted the feeling she gave him. Eliza, meanwhile, was playing her own game. She was young, ambitious, and knew exactly what she wanted. For her, Thomas was more than just a man. He was a ticket to a comfortable life. She was not interested in love or deep feelings. She saw him as a resource, a way to rise above, and in this game she was careful and cold-blooded. Their relationship developed, slowly turning into an addiction. Thomas felt that he was missing her, that he was living from one meeting to the next. Eliza played her role perfectly, skillfully choosing her words, making him feel special, desired, and the only one. But sometimes there was a shadow in her eyes, a hint of cold calculation that Thomas could not unravel. Every day, his meetings with Eliza became more intense, like a forbidden fruit that gradually conquered Thomas. She skillfully played the role of his inspiration, making him feel young and significant again. Their relationship no longer seemed like a mere adventure, as he had originally planned. It became his refuge, his outlet from routine and emptiness. One evening, Thomas invited Eliza to dinner at a small restaurant near the ocean. Sitting across from her, he watched her expressive eyes and graceful movements as she captured his attention. Behind her every smile and every word, Thomas saw something mysterious and dangerous, but it only made him more desirous. The conversation was easy, and Thomas no longer felt the weight of his double life. "Thomas, have you ever thought that your life could suddenly change?" she asked, leaning slightly across the table. This question took him by surprise. He thought about it, and for a moment felt a little uncomfortable. "Perhaps," he replied, smiling. "What would you change about your life if you could?" Eliza squinted her eyes slyly, her gaze deep and mysterious. "I would like to have the freedom and sense of security that I lack." Her words sounded like a slight hint, but he understood her. She wanted more: stability, confidence in the future, and he knew he could give it to her. The conversation left him with a lot to think about. On the way back home, Thomas felt their relationship take on a new depth. He was ready to do more for her than he had originally planned, even though he knew it could ruin his life. He was already in this trap, but he didn't want to get out. Over the next few weeks, Thomas became more and more immersed in this affair, often neglecting work meetings more than he had in the beginning. His wife, Anna, didn't notice, still focused on her work. Her career consumed her completely, and she didn't even wonder where Thomas disappeared to on weekends or why he became distant. Perhaps she saw it as a natural process in their marriage. One day, Thomas met with Robert to talk. The evening at the bar started out calmly, but his friend immediately noticed a change in Thomas's behavior. "You're in over your head, aren't you?" Robert asked, looking at him. Thomas smiled, but his eyes betrayed hidden anxiety. She's special, Robert. I can't stop. Every time I'm with her, I feel like I can live for real again. Robert sighed, twirling the whiskey glass in his hand. You should be careful. This isn't just a game. You've played too much, and there could be consequences. Robert's words weighed heavily on Thomas, but he kept telling himself that he was in control. He thought he could keep this passion on a short leash. His next meeting with Eliza took place in a private house he rented in a quiet neighborhood outside the city. It was a place where they could be alone without prying eyes, where their romance seemed to be the only reality. This time the atmosphere was different, tense. Eliza looked worried. Her movements were tense, and he noticed something new in her eyes, not only desire, but also a slight shadow of fear. You won't leave me, will you? She suddenly asked, her voice trembling. Thomas stopped for a moment, stunned by her question. He had not expected it. She had always been confident, and now suddenly she was doubting. It seemed to him that this question revealed her true face, the vulnerability he had never seen before. Eliza, I am here with you, and I have no intention of disappearing, he reassured her, hugging her. But this conversation made him think. Something had changed. Her question had sown anxiety in his soul, like a seed that would only germinate later but could no longer be ignored. Each new meeting with Eliza became an escape from everyday life for Thomas, an exciting flight from the routine that irritated him. Meetings with her were like a journey into a world where he felt alive again, and every time they said goodbye, Thomas felt an inexplicable emptiness gripping him. He realized that he was becoming dependent on her, that his desire to see her no longer obeyed logic or common sense. Eliza, feeling this dependence, intuitively began to use it to her advantage. She realized that Thomas was not just a man, he was her chance. His status, connections, and money gave her many opportunities that she would never have had without him. And although she was worried about the depth of this attachment, the feeling of power over such a strong and influential man gave her confidence. You're often sad when you leave me now, Thomas, she remarked one day, playing with his cufflinks that he had left in her apartment. She held them in her hands as if trying to see something more in these simple things. Thomas watched her, his gaze soft, almost defenseless. I'm afraid that one day this will all end, he confessed, and then I'll be alone again. Eliza didn't answer right away. She put her cufflinks on the table and came closer to him, stroking his cheek. I will always be there for you if you want me to be, she said. Her words sounded gentle, but Thomas felt a tinge of promise in them that she would stay with him only under certain conditions. These words reassured him for a moment, but they also alarmed him. They continued to meet in her apartment or in rented houses, where Thomas would bring her to avoid prying eyes. But the more time he spent with her, the more he felt that his life outside of his relationship with Eliza was losing its meaning. Work, meetings with partners, even communication with his wife Anna became something ghostly for him, existing only because reality demanded it. Anna, meanwhile, was so absorbed in her own life that she hardly noticed her husband's absence. Their lives became increasingly divided. He would come home late, spending the night with Eliza, and she, in turn, would either fall asleep in her office among the papers or disappear to meetings with her clients. This arrangement was convenient for Thomas. He didn't have to worry too much about his secret being exposed. But on the other hand, this indifference of his wife only reinforced his feeling that the life they once had finally lost all connection with reality. Eliza, on the other hand, realized that their relationship could be dangerous. She had heard of men who became desperate when their mistresses tried to leave them, of jealousy that turned into aggression. However, Thomas's status and money were so appealing to her that she continued to play the game, cautiously, but with the certainty that she would eventually get everything she wanted. She enjoyed the attention and the sense of power, but at the same time felt the boundaries of her security thinning with each new encounter. One evening, when Thomas took her to a rented house near the beach, they sat on the terrace for a long time, listening to the waves whisper. The air was permeated with the scent of salt water and fresh flowers growing in the garden, and this evening seemed perfect to them, almost magical. Thomas, how do you see our future? She asked, staring at the horizon. Her voice was soft, but it sounded like a challenge. Thomas thought about it. His heart beat faster at the thought, but he wasn't sure he could give her an answer. He knew that he would never leave Anna not because he loved her, but because their marriage was part of his status, and he was not ready to destroy his life for a young girl, even though he knew that his attachment to Eliza had become very deep. "Eliza, I want to be with you. I'm ready to do anything to make you happy," he said, trying to find a compromise that would suit them both. Eliza smiled, but her eyes remained cold. She had already begun to realize that for Thomas, she was not his only goal, but only a refuge from his personal demons, a feeling that in their relationship, he was finding something that helped him escape from reality. Their meetings became even more intense. Thomas was ready to provide her with everything she wanted. He gave her expensive jewelry, paid for resorts she could go to with her friends, just to be able to continue their affair. With each amount of money he spent, with each new gift, Thomas felt more and more dependent on her, as if this sacrifice made him her faithful servant. But at the same time as this dependence grew, so did his fear. His jealousy of Eliza grew with each meeting. He began to spy on her, wondering who she was spending time with when he wasn't around. He wanted her to belong only to him, but she remained free from the duties and obligations that bound him. One day Thomas saw her in the company of a young man. It happened by chance. He was supposed to pick her up after work when he saw her laughing and touching the other man's shoulder. That moment made him feel like he might lose her. Rage boiled up in his heart, and he was about to approach them, but stopped himself at the last moment. He realized that he had no right to show his jealousy openly. This incident left him thinking. He knew he could lose Eliza, and the thought scared him. He could no longer imagine his life without her, even though he realized that this dependence could turn against him. Every day Thomas's jealousy filled his mind more and more, like a poison that gradually destroyed him from the inside. He could no longer think calmly about Eliza without imagining that she could be with someone else. His head was full of thoughts about her, and these thoughts were turning into a real obsession. He realized that he was overwhelmed by a wave of irrational emotions, but he could not stop himself. One evening, after another meeting with Eliza, Thomas returned home with a heavy heart. He felt like he was losing control of himself in the situation, and it worried him. He realized that his jealousy had become so strong that he could no longer keep it in. Anna, his wife, remained indifferent to his changes, immersed in her own world. But Thomas could no longer find peace even at home. One day he suddenly called Eliza in the middle of the night. "Where are you now?" he asked, not even greeting her. "It's so late." Her voice sounded sleepy and a little surprised, but he didn't feel the warmth he was used to. On the contrary, her tone was slightly reserved, and this only increased his suspicions. "I just want to know what you're doing, who you're with. It seems to me that you spend too much time with other people," he said, trying to remain calm, but his voice still trembled. Eliza sighed, and he could hear a hint of irritation in her sigh. "Thomas, you know I'll always be with you whenever you want me to be. But you can't control my every move. I need space, just like you do." Her words passed through him like a cold stream, but they did not bring him relief. On the contrary, this answer only pushed him to further suspicions and doubts. He hung up the phone, but couldn't sleep all night, gripped by an inexplicable sense of threat. The next day, he decided to act. Thomas convinced himself that he had to know Eliza's every move, everyone she talked to, and even her every gesture. He hired a private detective to follow her, reporting back to him all the details of her life. This decision seemed logical to him. If she would not be honest with him, he would have to find the truth himself. The detective began his work, and in a few days Thomas received the first reports. At first, everything seemed normal. Eliza went to work, met with her friends, and sometimes sat in a cafe. But one evening, the detective called him with news that awakened real fear in him. "Your girlfriend was meeting a young man," the detective said. "They spent a few hours together in a cafe, and then he walked her home." These words were like a cold blow. Thomas felt something inside him break. He could not afford to lose her. The thought of Eliza giving her attention to someone else was unbearable. His jealousy turned into a real rage, and this rage fueled his desire to keep her by his side at all costs. Later that evening, he met Eliza at a restaurant. His hands were shaking as he sat down at the table across from her, but he tried to appear calm. Eliza looked as beautiful as ever, and he felt his obsession with her growing with every glance. "Who was that man?" he asked bluntly, unable to bear the tension. Eliza raised her eyebrows, her gaze cold. "Thomas, are you following me? That is so low. I am not your property, and you have no right to control my life." There was truth in her words, but he couldn't accept it. "I don't want you to be with others," he said, his voice trembling. "You are mine, and I won't let you go." Eliza looked at him silently, her eyes cold and distant. She was no longer the tender girl he had known. Her eyes were alienated, and he realized that this conversation had changed something between them. "Thomas, if you don't trust me, then our relationship has no meaning," she said calmly. Her words hurt him like a cold knife. He tried to justify himself, to explain that he just wanted to know that she was with him, that she belonged to him. But Eliza would not listen. She got up from the table and left the restaurant, leaving him alone in the middle of a quiet room. Thomas was left alone, feeling panic grip him. This night was a real test for him. He couldn't find a place to sit. His thoughts were spinning around how to get her back. He could not let her leave him. He was ready to do anything to keep her by his side. In the morning, he called her again, but she didn't answer. He sent several messages asking for a meeting, but received no response. Each of her silences only increased his despair, and he felt himself losing control. The feeling of threat became almost physical, and he was seized with panic. The next day he went to her apartment again, hoping to find her there. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He knocked harder, feeling his patience running out. Finally, the door opened, and Eliza stood on the threshold. Her face was cold, and he immediately realized that something had changed. "What do you want, Thomas?" she asked coldly. I can't live without you, Eliza," he admitted, his voice sounding almost pleading. "Please give me a chance. I'll do anything you want. Just don't leave me." She looked at him silently, and he saw in her eyes the same coldness he had felt in the restaurant. "You want too much, Thomas," she said, enunciating each word slowly. "And if you can't accept that, then we have nothing to talk about." These words pierced him, leaving him on the threshold of her apartment. He stood there, watching her close the door on him, and felt the world around him crumble. His obsession had turned into an unhealthy fear of loss, and now he was willing to do anything to get her back. Thomas remained standing in place, stunned by how quickly his hopes had been dashed. His heart was beating fast, and he felt that he could no longer control his actions. Thomas felt his world falling apart. The days after Eliza closed the door on him were spent in a continuous state of anxiety and despair. All his attempts to contact her again ended in silence. She did not answer his calls, did not respond to his messages. In his obsession, he could not accept the thought that he had lost her. This silence made him jealous, pushed him to the limit, and forced him to make decisions he would never have made before. One evening, he couldn't take it anymore and decided to try again. He texted Eliza, suggesting that they meet at a cozy house on the coast that they often rented for their meetings. He prepared everything for a romantic evening: candles, wine, and soft music. It was to be their chance to reconnect with everything that had bound them. Eliza didn't answer, but Thomas arrived early anyway, hoping she would show up. He waited, sitting in the darkness of the room where candles burned softly and wine stood open on the table. His eyes were on the door, and every sound made his heart clench with hope and fear. Finally, he heard footsteps. The door slowly opened, and Eliza appeared on the threshold. She looked reserved, a little distant. Her gaze was cold, and he knew immediately that she had not come here to return to him. "Thomas, what do you want?" she asked, not taking a single step forward. "I just want us to talk," he said, trying to remain calm. He pointed to the candlelit table and the wine glasses. "I've prepared everything for us. We could start over, fix everything. I'd do anything to have you stay." Eliza stood with her arms crossed over her chest, her face emotionless. "Thomas, we're done. I don't want to continue this relationship anymore." Her voice was clear and decisive. Eliza's words hit him like cold rain. He felt his heart clench with pain and rage. He couldn't believe that she was willing to leave him so easily. "I can't accept this," he said, raising his voice. "I've given you everything, Eliza. My love, my time, my money, even part of my soul. And you're just going to leave me?" Eliza sighed, her eyes growing even colder. "Thomas, you made this choice. I didn't ask you for anything. It was you who brought me into your life, and now you can't handle the consequences. I'm tired of being your toy." These words, spoken with absolute indifference, intensified his rage. He took a step forward, his face red with tension. "Toy? How can you say that? I love you. I do everything for you. And you're just going to leave me for some young man?" Eliza smiled disdainfully, and he found the expression mocking. "Thomas, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. I'm tired of your jealousy and control." That was the final blow. He grabbed her hand, squeezing it so hard that she cried out in pain. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. You belong to me. You are mine." Eliza tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. Her face contorted with fear and anger, and she tried to kick him, pulling away from his grasp. "Let me go, Thomas. You've lost your mind." Her words, her resistance, all added fuel to the fire of his anger. He felt something inside him break. In a rage, without realizing his actions, he pushed her back. She lost her balance, took a step back, and hitting the edge of the table, fell to the floor screaming. Thomas froze, realizing what had just happened. His breathing was labored, and he looked at her motionless body, horrified. He rushed to her side, hoping she had just fainted, but as he leaned over her, he realized that her heart was no longer beating. He stood in silence, watching the consequences of his own anger. It was an accident. He didn't mean to kill her, but there was nothing he could do about it. His mind refused to believe in the reality of what had happened, but the truth was in front of him. He had killed her. Suddenly, all the anger he had been feeling turned into emptiness, and in that emptiness, he was left alone. Eliza's body was found a few days after the tragedy. Her neighbors, concerned about the girl's long absence, contacted the police. Detectives soon arrived at the scene, examined the body, and realized that they were dealing with a suspicious death. For the detectives, this was the beginning of a complex investigation that, as they did not know, would lead them to one of the most influential businessmen in the city, Thomas. The first examination of the scene and the body showed that Eliza had died as a result of a blow that caused severe head trauma. It turned out that on the evening she died, she was seen in the company of her husband. Witnesses recalled seeing her arrive at a house on the coast with an older man. This was the first clue for the detectives, and they immediately began looking for more information about Eliza's personal life. The detectives, Ray and Kate, had been partners for many years. Ray was an experienced investigator, reserved and methodical, and Kate was a young but very capable detective who always saw details that others might have missed. Together, they began to gather evidence by interviewing Eliza's neighbors and friends to reconstruct the last days of her life. "It looks like she was in a relationship with an older man," Kate observed as she looked through Eliza's phone records. "There are a lot of calls and messages from the same number, especially in the last few days. It looks like they were fighting a lot." Ray nodded, listening intently to his colleague. "If it was jealousy, we can assume that emotional instability or even financial interests could have been the motive," he added. Detectives began searching for the number that belonged to Thomas. They were able to obtain data on the frequent calls Eliza received from his number, and this became the key that led them to Thomas's identity. At first glance, the city's successful and influential businessman seemed an unlikely suspect, but the information about his obsession and jealousy of the young girl was convincing enough to attract the attention of the investigation. As they investigated further, they learned that Thomas and Eliza were not only romantically involved, but also financially dependent. It seems that Thomas often supported her financially, paying for her expenses, gifts, and even her apartment rent. This information reinforced suspicions that he may have been so obsessed with her that he could not stand it when he realized he might lose her. The detectives summoned Thomas for questioning. He arrived at the police station with a mask of restraint, but his anxiety was visible even to the naked eye. Ray and Kate were cautious, realizing that they were dealing with a man who could be dangerous. but at the same time they knew that the key to the clue lay in his reactions. "Mr. Thomas, we understand that you knew Miss Eliza. Could you tell us about your relationship with her?" Ray asked, calmly observing Thomas's expression. "Yes, Eliza and I. We're close," Thomas replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I supported her, helped her in her life. She was an important person to me." "Important enough that you were willing to support her financially?" Kate clarified, looking at him with a look of mild curiosity. "Yes," he admitted after a short pause. "Eliza needed support, and I wanted to help her. I wanted her to feel safe." The detectives exchanged glances, and Ray leaned forward, carefully considering Thomas's reaction. "Did you know that Eliza might have been in another relationship? Perhaps with someone younger?" he asked, hinting slightly at the jealousy that might have been a motive. This question confused Thomas. "Eliza, she was free to make her own decisions," he replied, trying to hide his nervousness. "I had no control over her life." But his tone and expression said otherwise. The detectives noticed his voice trembling slightly and realized they were onto something important. "I see," Ray said, leaving the subject, but writing down his observations in his head. "We have a few more questions about the last night you saw Eliza." Thomas hesitated. It was difficult for him to hide his anxiety, but he tried to remain calm. "I saw her. We had a conversation," he answered, his voice trailing off. "She told me she wanted to leave me." "And how did you react to that?" Kate asked, watching him closely. "I couldn't understand why she decided to do that," he said, trying not to show his emotions. "But I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted her to be with me." The detectives continued to ask questions, tracking Thomas's every gesture, every word. They had seen this obsession before, and it seemed to have pushed him to the limit. During the conversation, it became apparent that jealousy was a powerful driving force for him, and this fact could serve as the basis for the investigation. After the interview, the detectives reviewed the evidence and witness statements. A conversation with Thomas only confirmed their suspicions. He was the last person to see Eliza alive, and their relationship, filled with jealousy and financial intrigue, created the perfect ground for the crime. Kate, reviewing the case file, noted his jealousy, his financial support, and finally their fight on the last night. Everything points to him. He could not withstand the pressure and may have killed her accidentally at a time when he lost control. Ray agreed with her conclusions. That's the real motive. His jealousy and desire to control her life drove him to despair. The only question is how we will prove his guilt. The detectives knew they had a tough job ahead of them, but they already had enough clues to gather evidence against Thomas. Detectives Ray and Kate focused all their efforts on gathering evidence against Thomas. They realized that this time they would have to deal not only with a powerful emotional component, but also with legal complexity, because Thomas was a man with an impeccable reputation and extensive connections. This complicated the case, but the detectives were confident that the evidence was there, and they just needed to put it together. The first important clue came from the surveillance footage around the house on the coast where Thomas and Eliza spent their last evening. The cameras recorded Eliza arriving with Thomas on the night of her death. The footage showed them entering the house together, but did not show the moment when Thomas left, indicating that he was trying to conceal his exit. The cameras also captured him walking back to his car late at night, leaving the house without looking back. "That indicates he spent considerable time with her that night," Kate said as she watched the footage with Ray. "She was alone there after he left, but it's obvious something happened between them." Ray nodded. "We need more details, but it gives us a direction. If we can confirm that they were fighting that night, we'll have a strong motive." The next important step was to examine the messages and email correspondence between Thomas and Eliza. The messages we found showed increasing tension in their relationship. In several messages, Thomas hinted at his jealousy, showing his concern that Eliza might be having another relationship. Kate carefully reviewed one of the letters sent shortly before Eliza's death. In it, Thomas wrote openly, "Eliza, I can't take it anymore. You know that I would do anything for you, but you are playing with me. If this continues, I will run away from it all. I can't take it." He was clearly on the edge, Kate said. This is no ordinary letter. He's obsessed with her, and it looks like a warning. Ray agreed. Obsession often drives people to despair. It's not proof, of course, but it's an important element that adds to our case. If we can find some more evidence of their quarrels, we can get a clearer picture of the motive. Next, the detectives turned to Eliza's friends and acquaintances to find out if they had seen her and Thomas in conflict. One of the neighbors who had seen Eliza and Thomas together several times at the house on the coast confirmed that he had heard shouting and sounds of an argument during one of their visits. "I was surprised because I always saw her in a good mood, but that time she looked upset," the neighbor said. "I couldn't understand the words, but it sounded like they were having a big fight." Soon, detectives received the results of the examination from the scene. One of the candles they found at the scene had Thomas's fingerprints on it, indicating his presence. This confirmed his contact with the objects in the room at the time of the murder. Finally, after compiling all the evidence, cameras, neighborhood testimonies, emails, and forensic results, the detectives decided to call Thomas back in for questioning. This time, their strategy was different. They intended to gradually disclose all the evidence they had collected to him so that he would realize that it was impossible to recant. Thomas arrived at the interrogation, trying to remain calm, but it was already clear that he was embarrassed and tense. His face had lost its former confidence, and there were traces of fear in his eyes. "Mr. Thomas, we know that you were with Eliza the night she died," Kate began, looking at him calmly, "and we know you had a fight." Thomas tried to find an excuse, but he realized more and more that he was backed into a corner. His breathing was getting faster, and his eyes darted between the detectives, as if looking for a way out. "It was an accident," he said, barely audible. "It just happened. We were arguing, she pushed me, and I lost control. I didn't mean to kill her." The confession came out of him like an explosion he could no longer contain. "So you admit that you were there that night, and that your argument led to her death?" Kate clarified, her voice remaining steady and professional. "Yes," he whispered. "It was an accident, but now it all makes no sense." His confession was the culmination of the investigation, and the detectives closed their case by submitting all the materials to the court. Thomas was left alone with his crime, realizing that his obsession and jealousy had led to fatal consequences. The courtroom was crowded with journalists, spectators, and media representatives eager to learn more about this high-profile case. Thomas, a well-known businessman accused of murdering his young mistress Eliza, became the center of close attention as his story shocked many. Behind the mask of a successful entrepreneur was a man driven to despair by jealousy and obsession. The trial lasted for several weeks, with each day adding new details and emotional tension. Witnesses, including Eliza's friends, neighbors, and even the detectives who investigated the case, confirmed the story the prosecutor had told at the beginning. Gradually, the picture of jealousy, obsession, and tragic ending became apparent to everyone present. Finally, after long hearings and speeches, the jury made its decision. They found Thomas guilty of involuntary manslaughter, which was the result of his recklessness and loss of control. The judge sentenced him to 13 years in prison. Thomas sat in his cramped cell, watching the days pass by one by one. During this time, his life had completely changed. He had lost everything he had ever had: status, respect, money, freedom, and most importantly, himself. His obsession, which he once thought was love, turned into a bitter reminder of how blind jealousy and the desire for control can lead to destruction. It was a story about how one mistake, born of jealousy and the desire to possess, changed his life forever and brought him only retribution.